Listening to the discussion at this exceptionally important conference, several things occur to me. First of all, the financial system, which was at the root of this particular crisis, is in need of drastic simplification. George Soros mentioned that during the period before 1970, the banking system was very quiet. You couldn't make a great deal of money off of it. It was almost like a public utility. People like Mr. Soros, who run hedge funds, scarcely existed because there were few opportunities to make the kind of bets that hedge funds make. And of course, curiously, perhaps not so curiously, this was a period when the financial part of the economy was very quiet and the real economy was thriving. The financial economy was doing its job of providing capital at relatively low interest rates in relatively predictable circumstances to the real economy. And the real economy grew at a rate never matched before or since, except perhaps in developing countries that have a very different kind of version of autocratic capitalism. So I think the period after the Great Depression was a period when financial markets were constrained for the greater good of the rest of the capitalist system. That lasted 30 or 40 years until various kinds of innovations overwhelmed the regulatory structure of the 30s, and because the political balance of power had changed, there was no political will to keep these innovations housebroken, to keep them domesticated, so that they could be benign rather than potentially malign. So it seems to me the first challenge for us is to figure out how to leash financial markets so that they can once again serve real markets. And we need a drastic simplification of the financial system. A lot of people would say, well, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. I don't believe that. And I think part of the project is precisely to put the genie back in the bottle. What do I mean? In the 30s, they put the genie back in the bottle. All of the speculative techniques that exist today existed in embryo, and sometimes in a more flagrant way, in the 1920s. Securitization existed in the 20s. That practice of taking very dubious loans and turning them into securities and marketing them to innocent investors, that existed in the 20s. Middlemen getting very, very rich because they had privileged access to credit or privileged knowledge that ordinary people didn't have, that existed in the 20s. Financial bubbles obviously existed in the 20s. Excess leverage, layering, pyramiding, all of the abuses that existed in the 70s, 80s, 90s that finally culminated in the crash of 2007, 2008 were prevalent in the 20s. And then you had a political revolution. And so most of the abuses were contained and constrained. So that, to me, is the radical difference between what happened in the 20s and what happened in recent years. Not that the abuses were fundamentally different, but that the political response and the systemic response was different. And we are only at the very beginning of that. You would think that the hegemony of finance would have been shaken by the disgrace of finance. That did not happen. And the whole impulse of the central bankers, the finance ministries, the treasury secretaries, in the first instance was to say, how do we restore confidence? How do we prop this back up? And that's what they've done. And profitability has been restored to Wall Street, to the city. It has not been restored to the main streets and the high streets of the world. And the political imbalance where finance has too much political power has continued. And even though this is a conference of heterodox economists, the orthodox economists, for the most part, have not admitted the error of their ways and their entire paradigm. Rather, the story is, well, this is a one-off. These catastrophes happen every 7 years or every 70 years, and that's just the way capitalism is. But we still have faith in our models. So I think you have to shake the models, you have to shake the politics, and you have to have a commitment to a radical simplification of finance. And of course, that takes a counter-revolution both in economic thinking and in politics.